multiple cups of coffee, glorious analog film and television equipment that actually works, and the burning desire to keep journalistic integrity alive. These are truly the only bright moments in today's film, which expertly chronicles a very dark day in our history. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, we have a really great episode for you today. It's September 5 with co-writer Moritz Binder and co-writer-director Tim Fehlbaum. In case you aren't aware, September 5 chronicles the 1972 Munich Olympics from the perspective of what was happening behind the scenes in the ABC Sports studio as they were broadcasting the news of the terrorist actions underway during the Olympics. It's almost like a great companion piece to Steven Spielberg's film Munich, in which this is the story that's rarely been told about how American journalists with a German and French crew worked together to broadcast to the world the horrific events of the terrorist actions that were underway at the 1972 Olympics. Of course, it helps that the filmmakers met with the journalists involved and chronicled their story into a really well-paced screenplay that became a heck of a film. And of course, you could read the screenplay over at the Backstory Magazine blog, and Moritz and Tim were generous enough to also give us two very short deleted scenes that we talked about towards the end of the episode, and you could see that on the Backstory blog as well. Without a doubt, Moritz and Tim were very forthcoming about their creative process and what it took to bring September 5 to the screen, so I know you'll dig this episode. I'm sure by now my listeners around the world have seen the news about the Los Angeles fires in the Pacific Palisades and in Altadena and throughout the Southlands, and the fires are continuing to rage but seem to be a little more under control each day, which is a good thing. There's certainly a resiliency to Los Angelinos wanting to rebuild and wanting to get a fresh start and hopefully stay as safe as they can and help each other out. And if you're listening and you want to help from anywhere in the world, there's no amount too small to send in because so many people have been affected. And if you do want to donate, there's plenty of places you could go, but two right off the bat would be the LAFD Foundation Wildfire Emergency Fund, which helps out the firefighters who did such a great job under horrible conditions, and also the California Fire Foundation, which helps out victims of fires throughout the state. Everyone's still picking up the pieces, and it's nice that we could be connected online the way that we are. So if you're in the mood to donate, don't hesitate, and thanks for considering. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. We're going to turn 13 this year, and we couldn't have done it without you. And there's a lot going on in the magazine. Our awards season issue, our Gladiator 2 issue is out, and we are continuing to update it with new articles because we're a digital magazine. We could do that. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us over at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, here's discount coupon code SAVE5. That's save and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. All you got to do is enter it into the little shopping cart at backstory.net, and don't worry, you'll still have access to the iPad app with your login credentials there as well. And you could even give Backstory as a gift subscription. All you need to do is tick the gift subscription box, and that'll set you up. Now, one word of advice: once you complete your transaction, that notification will go out to the email of the person you are giving the gift to immediately. So you might want to maybe write Backstory Magazine as a gift on a card and then do the subscription after you give them the gift, or just be very aware of when you're giving them the gift because they'll be notified. So there's no element of surprise there, aside from the cool email that they'll get. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go. That's right. You could see us talking on Zoom on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. It would really mean a lot to me to have your support for independent entertainment journalism, so thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now let's jump right into our interview with co-writer Moritz Binder and co-writer-director Tim Fehlbaum about their latest film, September 5, which is in theaters right now. Tim, Moritz, it's great to see you. I absolutely love your film.
Oh,
Congrats
thank
on
you.
September 5. We're going to start by giving people just a baseline for each of you. And Tim, I know you studied directing at the University of Television and Film in Munich. What was so important about film school for you? And if you remember a moment where things really clicked off in your mind and you were kind of developing your craft in film school, if that's something that happened, please tell us about that too. I know for starters that you met Moritz at film school.
Yes, exactly. No, first of all, thanks for having us here. Thanks for saying these things about the movie. It's, yeah, for us a great pleasure to talk about the movie here. I wanted to do films for quite some time, and immediately after school, I applied to a lot of film schools over Germany, but also in the UK. I got accepted to all of them, and then decided to go to Munich because Munich had this a special reputation, and also based on what my research was, and there was a lot of people whose work I admire went there. And yeah, I think for me, one of the most important things that happened at film school are the connections that you make there. You mentioned it already. I met Moritz there, who also studied there. I met Markus Förderer there. That's a DP of September 5. I met Philip Trower there. That's one of the producers of September 5. So it's somehow connections. I don't know if it's especially in Munich, but I got a feeling somehow that it's there even more so than a lot of schools that you make forever or your work for work in a way. Another thing that I would mention was eye-opening to me. Like there are different study fields in that film school. There's documentary, there's script writing. When I started though, there was not the script writing class yet. That only was recently to the possibilities what you can study there. And what I also find interesting, I did, for example, also had a big passion for camera work. And I worked a lot as a cameraman for these documentary students. I wasn't asked for doing features because I didn't know the whole technical apparatus too well and how to set up the lights, etc. But I had a certain interest in operating camera, and I had a certain style, I would say. That was some of my short films where I also did camera and then wanted to have me maybe as a cameraman for their documentaries. And I must say, that's where also, I'm sure we're going to talk about this regarding September 5. That's the work that I did on film school where I learned the most from.
That's great. Moritz, what could you tell us about your film school experience?
It's the opposite because I had to apply 4 times, but which was actually a good thing because the first time I applied, I also applied for directing. And then after that first failure, it brought me to my first job, which was as a TV journalist, actually. So I did a lot of TV for like 5-6 years. And I suddenly realized that working with like the real life, real people, real stories, which is intriguing to me. So I applied for documentary directing, which was a great time at FM University because you learn to accept like presence from the reality. This is something that when I switched to screenwriting, actually, which really helped, I learned how to research, how to behave in interviews, how to talk to real people, and always be open for this like little gems that reality gives you. This was really eye-opening to me.
That's great. Tim, we're going to get to September 5 in a couple minutes, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring up your first big feature film that really put you on the map, Hell, in 2011. It's a well-received thriller. It was produced by Roland Emmerich, who you continued to work with. The 2 questions I have for you about that is, what was your biggest lesson on Hell? And were there any creative habits that you noticed by working with Roland Emmerich that kind of you wanted to adopt into your own style?
To say these are films that are in complete different genre, post-apocalyptic sci-fi movies. And so the story obviously is different, but I think what is similar is the way I approached it to how to shoot it. Or even though these are science fiction films, I wanted to shoot it like a documentary film or like a European art house film. That was basically the idea. In 2011, there were not many. That changed now with the streamers. That changed a lot. But in 2011, there were not many genre films coming out of Europe and especially not out of Germany. And when I started to have that idea that I want to do this post-apocalyptic after the climate change, there's another thing that wasn't the everyday's topic, climate change in 2011. That was not every day's newspaper and article. I then had a hard time to be taken serious on wanting to do a genre film. And I said, but I want to shoot it like I shot these documentaries. I want to have this real feeling to it. And I want to work with actors and actresses that rather come from the art house section. So what I did shoot a little test film, a proof of concept that's been done often. I'm just saying that to people who might listen who find it interesting to hear that. And basically, I did it very, very low budget. It was just like for 400 euros or so I could do, which equals $400 or so. I could shoot it over 2 weekends in Munich, and I edited it myself. I basically produced the whole thing myself, and it was a very really guerrilla style filmmaking. And then I had this and said, I want to do this, but in long. And that is when producer Thomas Wöpke came on board. And that was still good because he had a good reputation in Germany, also for quality movies. But still, we had a hard time financing it, even though it's super low budget. It was
Right.
like compared to movies that I did later, the next one that I did then. So we got Roland Emmerich on board, which is also a good story. I don't know if you have time for this, but it's a good story how he came on board.
You can tell us really quick as long as you guys.
I can tell you quick because like Thomas said, okay, if we do a movie like this in Germany, we have to get the blessing of Roland, because if Roland is there as a mentor, then it opens doors, especially in Germany, gives the whole thing another credibility. So we had the script, we did send it to Roland, and we attached with the short films, but he never had time to read it. Obviously, he's a busy man. I think he was shooting 10,000 BC or something. Yeah, we never got feedback, so we were stuck. Then his sister, Ute Emmerich, got married. And Thomas Wöpke, the producer of Hell and also the producer of September 5, said, okay, Tim, this is our chance. They were looking for someone to do the wedding video. And he said, oh man, this is our chance. You'll do the wedding video, you do it really good, and then we'll have his attention. And first I thought, come on. It's like that's why I went to film school for now, to do wedding videos. But I did it. It was in Italy, and we shot it, and I edited it for like weeks, and they made the whole sound design. And yeah, I can tell it's one of the best wedding videos we ever produced, probably. And then we showed it to him. He said, okay, now I want to see the movie, the short films, and read the script. To answer your question, what I learned from Roland, ironically, it's the opposite of what you would guess. He taught me more about how I can operate with a low budget and make it look big without using much CGI, but rather things like dust in the air and having things overexposed. So like it's just something that you wouldn't expect as being one of the major advice from Roland Emmerich.
I love that story, and it shows a go-get-'em attitude, that's really important to have. And, because you did a good job, it paid off. I mean, if you were cheesy and you just got in there so you could throw a script at somebody, that would be really bad. Kids, don't do this at home. Yes, if you go and do a really good job and take your job seriously, of course, someone will give you that 30 seconds of, what is it you're saying you want from me? And that's awesome that it worked out. Moritz, I know that you had done a lot of TV writing after film school, notably on the reboot of the popular 1970s cop show Tatort, if I'm pronouncing it right. Am I pronouncing it right? Okay.
You're pronouncing it right, yes.
Okay, and other television. What were some eye-opening moments for you as you were getting out there? And then we're going to get right to September 5th, because we're just finishing up your breaking in story.
Eye-opening in a way that it doesn't matter what you're writing. It's always about, I think, the research and finding like a world you can really dig deep into research, a world with like own rules, own language. This is what I said in the beginning. This, if you like, find a world that is rich, it gives you all the presence you need to find a story within it. Because when you're sitting at your desk, at least me sitting at my desk, it's not always the ideas come to me like easily. But if you have like a world you can do the research in, you just sit there basically and listen to people for like days and sometimes weeks, and then you get all that gems. And this happened with the Tatort. This happened with other TV stuff as well. And so it doesn't really matter if it's like a feature or it's like a TV project. It always comes down to trying to get it right, I think.
That's great. Well, let's talk about the idea for September 5. It's actually surprising that no one has picked this angle. And, working in Germany as you both do, I easily could have seen the events of September 5 from a German TV station or the head of the German police force. There's still stories that I'm sure either have been told in some version or remain to be told. But this concept of focusing on what was going on in the broadcast room of the ABC Sports studio is just a genius way in to the center of what was happening and unfolding. And so, it's a fresh take. Tell us about the early ideas and how it kind of grew from there into the film we know.
It's actually quite a journey. I mean, because we when we started the project, we actually tried all that. Like we were looking into police files that were just recently opened for public. So we looked in all police files from the archive, state archive, and we found so many perspectives that were like super interesting to us. So we actually started this whole project as a film that's told from different perspectives. We had just maybe you can help me, Tim, but we had like the police, we had the politicians, we already had some members of the media, like a German radio journalist and already an American TV producer, but it was really big. And we started already writing the script. We wrote 4 drafts of the script, and that script got bigger and bigger. I think the fourth draft was like 170 pages because it was so rich. It just got too big, like financially, but also like the story got too big. And then we had to think about how can we reduce it? What's in there that we really felt? What perspective was the perspective that got us the most? So we looked each other in the eyes and we said, I think the media, like the role of the media that day, is something that we both never heard of and is asking questions we really can rely to, right, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say there were 3 things coming together. First, Jeff, as you say correctly, we also, especially as a German production, thought, okay, we have to show the German politician side. Also, we have to try to explain or show to the audience why or how much Germany has failed on that day, because they did. They weren't prepared. It was unprecedented, but still, it was not a good day for Germany. Then there were, as Moritz says, we were already quite far in that process. And then there were 3 things coming together. One is what he said by it almost became too big. I also want to say that from a director's point of view, I started to feel more and more uncomfortable about certain storylines on how I would direct them and how to tell them. As you know, today there's a very healthy discussion going on who can tell a story about what. The media side was something that I, on a different level, as someone who's working in the media myself in a way, if you want to, I connected to in a different way. And we also found out more things that we didn't knew before. While with the other storylines, there wasn't really a big revelation that we thought, oh, wow, that's completely new, especially considering that we didn't want to speculate with anything. The next thing that happened was that we had this research conversation with Jeffrey Mason. That's the character in the movie played by John Magaro. And he told us of his experience of his 22-hour marathon of live broadcasting, how they made that switch from reporting on the serene games, as the Germans called it, to this tragedy. And listening to that was so interesting and inspiring that we first, after that, jokingly said, maybe we can tell it entirely, we should tell it entirely from that control room. Then the third thing that happened is that it got really difficult to finance. I want to add at this point that we have a group of producers that were very, very involved. Like, it's not, we developed it together with Philip Trauer, Thomas Wöbke, and John Wildermuth, and John Palmer from Projected Picture Works, and Philip Trauer and Thomas Wöbke from Beckers Wöbke. But still, of course, we needed to finance that big movie. And it was like, really, it was big. It was in the 70s. It was action. It was airplanes, whatever. It was a lot. And then we said, before the project was dead, we said, okay, hold on. Let's get back to that idea that we had. Give us 3 weeks. We'll come back to you with something. And then basically what the first thing that we did is we opened Final Draft, or Moritz did that, and just deleted all storylines, all scenes that were not part of that media storyline. Then we read it and thought, actually, that's already pretty good. And maybe that could really be the movie. For me, that's an interesting lesson on how sometimes there is restriction in budget, or if you get a limitation from the outside, it can inspire your thinking and make you more creative in a way. Because nowadays, we are really glad that we did choose this perspective, because I think it's much more original. It says something about our consumption of the media today through that historical lens. And I think it's been praised especially for that. I myself also admire movies that draw a certain strength from limitation in perspective, in time, and that's also what I found challenging, like almost in this Hitchcockian sense. Like, how can I tell a movie that takes place entirely in one room, right? He was obsessed with that idea. He wanted to tell a movie that takes place entirely in a phone booth, but also Rear Window is a movie or so where you're actually always in that room. So there were many things coming together. that maybe at the moment you're like, no, but we wrote all of this, or especially Moritz, I'm sure we're going to talk more about the process on how we wrote it. Now we have to delete all of that. But then it was the best thing that could have happened, I think.
It really changes the perspective of the movie, obviously, but it enhances it because it also allowed for this real history sense to unfold, in which if you're in the control room, you're then able to access the real footage of the day on the monitors. You know, you have a forced perspective, as you said, in which you're only seeing what they're seeing in the control room and trying to figure out behind the scenes, which people love, what to do with it all, what to make of it all. It really was like a perfect storm to kind of put the characters and the audience together in that confined space. I also have always loved movies that have a finite timeline, you know, and this is, as you said, 22 hours. It goes overnight and you know, everybody's getting exasperated and, you know, exhausted and just trying to get through the situation as best as they can while serving their audience, which was new. It was also the perfect storm, as the movie says, of the first major televised satellite worldwide event that drew in huge audiences, not really expecting what happened to happen. It really figured a lot out. So, you know, going back to your discussion with Jeffrey Mason, who becomes, you know, a central character in the film, because this is the day he proved himself on the job as the young guy who needed to prove himself. What else came out of those conversations that you realized could be adapted into the script? I guess, you know, we'll get into it deeper in the spoiler section if you want. I'm just curious about like how long you sat with him, and did you come back for repeat sessions? Tell us how that worked.
Well, the first Zoom call was planned for, I think, 30 minutes, and it went on like 90 minutes, 2 hours. One of the first things we really, like you said, got excited about is this certain perspective and this rush. Like he told us immediately about how it felt to be there, what kind of rush it was, and with the ticking clock, with getting something done that was never done before, and asking you some questions along, but at first you have to make it happen. And this rush, this adrenaline rush, was something we thought, if we can get this on the page, this would actually be like a nail-biting movie. And somehow we asked him, of course, to call him again. And he went with us through every draft. We had a lot of conversations. With every conversation, he got more into details. What did he wear? What kind of car he drove? Was he a smoker? Like every detail. And the language. The language was really one of the greatest gifts we got from him, because how did they talk? I mean, that they called the satellite the bird that day. That there was one satellite, and the satellite had a name, which is, I think, really funny to us nowadays, but it was the bird. This is something that comes directly from him, and a lot more.
Of course, we saw the broadcast, and by the way, you also asked, it's a good question, why choose ABC Sports and not some of the other broadcasters that have been there, like the German television or any others that have been there. And the reason is, apart from our encounter with Jeffrey Mason, is that they were the only ones that had that live camera and on what's happening. Because Jeffrey Mason in the morning had the idea of, why don't we just cover whatever we're doing here in the studio with 2 cameras and roll out one of the live cameras, one of these big cameras. And we've been standing there a lot. The studio of ABC Sports was really close to the apartment. So of course, part of our topic is how a tragic event like this suddenly became a live TV event for the first time, and how you just see that facade, you don't see nothing happen, but it's live. Anyhow, that was something that he told us, and then we learned that they were the only ones having that. Then he told us things like that they had to, at a certain point, battle against the own news division on keeping to keep the story. And that reminded us what is so interesting about the specific case of Munich 72 is that it was a bunch of sports broadcasters, and they had to fight, had to say to news, no, we can do this. We can handle this.
I've known who Peter Jennings is for years, and I never knew that he was in sports first, kind of occasionally being a Middle East expert. And it was just fascinating to see how it all coalesced.
It was the opposite, though, from our research. So he was the expert. And Ruun Alic, before the Olympics, called him and said, hey, Peter, why don't you want to take a break from your Middle East job and come here to Munich to make some of these special pieces? And then he ended up being closer to the conflict than he has ever been before, as he also quotes it in the film.
It's really fascinating. Another fascinating element in the footage was, the broadcaster Jim McKay. He was the host, and it was great that you were able to get the footage rather than have to recast an actor. Did you have a backup plan if you couldn't get the footage? And I'd like to talk about getting the rights to the footage from that day from ABC as well.
We always talk about a plan B, but I think we never really had like the plan B or wanted to have the plan B, right? Because it was so crucial to us to have the real Jim McKay in this movie.
He made like some of the lines in that script we didn't write ourselves, right? He came up with that on the spot. And he had this very unique way of walking the audience through this catastrophe, like trying to stay professional, but still being empathetic in a way. And he came up with these things like when I was a kid, my father used to say what he says at the very end. His son actually told us, I'm sure we're also going to talk about this, how he came up or why he came up with that line. Anyway, we had to have a plan B because it wasn't clear if we get it. And we actually already cast actors for that role. But to me, and again, I want to say we were blessed to be surrounded with producers that had the same vision. To all of us, it was actually clear, no, we have to have the original. These actors did a great job on impersonating him, but it's just something different if it's the original or not. And in a way, also, the film is about the people behind the camera. So the people in front of the camera should be the real people. Also, we thought if McKay would be an actor, then suddenly the audience starts to wonder, why doesn't he have a storyline in the script? If it's just the real Jim McKay, the audience subconsciously doesn't question it because they know that it's the real Jim McKay. Another reason why we so desperately wanted to have it, because we were afraid if we don't get it, suddenly the audience asks themselves, what about the host storyline? I want to learn more about that. And since it was only weeks before shooting, really, literally, or days even, that it became 100% clear, it was super complicated. First of all, it was because the producers were sharing the same vision and were really stubborn in trying to get it. And Jeffrey Mason, who supported us, he's still very connected in the sports world. And then I went with John McGarvey, with the main actor, for research. I went to a lot of control rooms just to observe these people. I mean, we did that before, Moritz and I, in a way that you worked in TV studios, you knew that world already. I wanted to see that more with my own eyes. And John McGarvey wanted to study on how these people behave. And I was one day at CBS Sports, which was back then run by Sean McManus. And Sean McManus is the son of Jim McKay. And he was the CEO of CBS Sports. And I saw him by chance in the hallway, and I knew, okay, this is my opportunity. I have to go to talk to him. So I went up to him and said, look, I'm a filmmaker from New York. I have a project. Your father plays a really important role in it. Can we talk? And he was kind enough to not only, because he was also in Munich, so he shared his memories of that day with us, which also was another interesting source, of course, for the script writing. Then he flanked our approach and getting the copyrights, and that was I think because all of these elements coming together, we were finally able to get it.
I'd also read that Jeffrey somehow knew Bob Iger at Disney and had reached out to him, getting the ABC clearances because Disney owns ABC. So I mean, it's major. Writers sometimes could get lost in research. There's endless supply of it. This is the first time that the world saw a terrorist act unfold as, a Palestinian group kidnapped the Israeli team. So everyone was transfixed and at the same time kind of frozen, unsure what to do. So this group of journalists being called into action is, again, a great setting for the film. But as researchers, you now have access to all the transcripts of what was said on the scene, all of your interviews. How long was your research period? Because I could see something like that going on for a long time. It's something to get lost in.
I think the first research phase until we started approaching that first approach was maybe half a year, 6 months, maybe around something like that. And then the good thing about that is that we knew everything that happened inside the Olympic Village by then. I mean, we almost knew it like minute by minute. And then when we changed to say, okay, now we're going inside the studio, we could focus on what did they know? What were rumors they heard? What was something and we really could focus on that. And then this was, like Tim said, ongoing, the whole research process, because you see, like we got the ABC material, we got it like slice by slice, like reel by reel. And the last reel, I remember we got like 5 days before shooting. And inside that reel, without spoilering it now, was a crucial scene we have never seen before. And we said, we need that scene in the movie. We need it. which means we have to reopen the script again, like the weekend before shooting. And this is what Tim said. We were so blessed with the producers. They said, yeah, you have to go for it. Do it, because it's really a good scene. So we opened the script again and changed it, like Saturday and Sunday, and Monday we started shooting. So it went on, I think, until the first day of shooting.
I want to say, like, yeah, Moritz is really, like, you can tell, because coming from documentary, he was going so deep generally on that day, what happened in research. And then I think that's why, as you just said, Moritz, that's why the first draft then was really fastly, like with that new approach, we had it together like really fastly. But that's only because he knew all of that before already. And I think it's just, yeah, it's a good example of how you have to know the whole picture to be then really specific in one perspective. Even though we decided very clearly that we don't want to show anything, we want to show it so clearly from the perspective of these broadcasters. We never want to leave the studio. They shouldn't know anything that these people wouldn't know. They shouldn't see anything that they wouldn't see. And also their knowledge of the political context, they should not know from the knowledge of these sports broadcasters, we would tell it. But even though we had that restriction, it was good to get the bigger picture. Getting back to what you said about getting lost in research, I also want to maybe say, like, where we maybe got a little bit lost is because we were both like fascinated with that analog world and how TV was made back then with the whole technological apparatus. And there we might have done a little bit more research than necessary. And then suddenly you get really, what's this? This is this tape machine. What is it exactly?
I'm going to talk about that in the spoiler section, because there was a few things that you called out that I thought were just excellent. I'll rush through my last non-spoiler questions so we can get into the spoilers. Let's talk about your creative habit for a second. When you sit down to write, how important is outlining to your process?
Well, to me, outlining in that case wasn't that important, because the reality already did the outline of the events in a certain way. And the thing is how I work, and this really matches so good with how Tim works, because maybe because I studied documentary, I really need to have something I can work with. So I'm really fast in writing, like, for example, a scene. I try not to overthink the scene. I know what's it about, but I try to write it fast to have it there. And then I need somebody, and Tim is like the perfect match for that, to condense it in the rhythm of the movie, to get it to the core of the scene. Because this first approach of writing a scene is almost like stepping into a room and look around for yourself and trying to get in all of these impressions and get it on the page. And then it's a very rich page. Maybe it's 2 or 3 pages, but it needs to be like 1 page max. So Tim was really good at finding this core and finding the rhythm, which was crucial to the script, like finding the right rhythm to the scene, so that it's not too rushed, like people like following the events, but it needs to have this certain ticking clock feeling. And Tim was unbelievably good at finding the rhythm of the script.
I think we're a really good match. I'm like the opposite of Moritz. I have a hard time sitting in front of a blank page starting to write. Out of Moritz, it just comes like, and it's there, and it's long maybe, but it's there, and you have something to work with, and that's the most important step. But what I really like to do is then analyze a scene. Then I know Moritz well. I see like, he meant it probably like this, and try to figure out how this can come across better. And I just like to get it tightened up and all of these things.
When you guys wrote, did you write together, or maybe break the story together and then pass scenes back and forth to each other? Tell us about when you were actually writing.
Well, we always had like an open Zoom link, like almost like sometimes for hours a day, and you could hear the other guy like clicking on his keyboards.
Right.
And sometimes in the end, we split up the script, like first half, second half. But in the beginning, we started with sending like scenes to each other. And that was a great process, because Tim is Swiss. He's very polite. And he striked out when I sent him like a long scene. He striked out the stuff he wanted to get out, like, so I could see what he wants to take out. And then I said, you don't have to do that. Just take it out. Just delete it. I trust you, and I trust your rhythm feeling. Yeah, it was always like a tennis match in a way, which was a very good way to work, because it played to the strength of both of us, I would say.
What was your budget and schedule? What did it finally end up being at?
What the final number was, I have to ask producers also.
Okay, the schedule then. How long?
The schedule, 31 days, I think.
31 days. Wow. That's That's awesome. I mean, you got everything on the screen, and that's a compact amount of time to cover this.
Yeah.
Was rehearsal important to kind of get all the actors attuned to what was going to be going on in that room, or?
Yeah, no, not real, because the idea how I planned to shoot it is that I wanted, and yeah, I stole this idea actually from watching Paul Greengrass's a film that is a huge influence on us, was on us, is United 93 by Paul Greengrass.
Right.
And I watched it once with DVD audio commentary. I think that's actually something, that's one of the saddest things about not having Blu-rays or DVDs anymore, that you don't have that so much anymore. I learned so much from watching films with audio commentary of directors.
Yes.
And he was talking in that audio commentary about his process on how he shot these scenes in the, I'm sure you've seen the movie, right? In the air traffic control that felt so authentic. And he just let everything happen in reality on the set, like as they thought it must have happened on that day. So all the phone calls were real, whatever they saw on the monitors were real, partly even these were real air traffic controllers being there, mixed with cast or so. And he just observed it with the camera and documentary style. I had the same, and I wanted to have the same approach for our scenes in our control room. Everything, the podcast shouldn't look at green screens. Everything should be there. The walkie-talkie calls would happen in real, and we would just cover it in long takes. And that is why the magic of the first take was so important. That is why we didn't want to do any rehearsal, because that magic of the very first take, when everything happens for the very, of course you do it dryly, you talk at the table, you try to get all of the questions out of the way so that you save time on set.
Right.
But I wanted the energy and everything. Also, like, the camera shouldn't know exactly where they would walk. We embrace these little delays in focus or in panning or so. Marcus always said he wanted to do the first take as if we would be ourselves live, and this would be his one shot to get the scene with two cameras. Yeah, that's why the reason we didn't have rehearsals. I mean, since this is a movie about people in the professional environment, they rehearse a lot their function that they would do. So John McGarrell rehearsed on how to direct, which buttons to push. Ben Chaplin had to learn how to thread in film, because even if you shoot just a close-up or so, you just feel if that's real or not. So that was more the preparation than actually rehearsing the scenes.
I guess last non-spoiler question for you is your title. I mean, obviously Spielberg did the movie Munich, but that's more about the aftermath and hunting down the terrorists. There was a documentary which won an Oscar, One Day in September. Your title is September 5. Were there other titles that you played with, or was that always it?
I think it was one of the first titles, right? Because it's like, it's giving you the idea that this is like a day that, or like a date or a day where the world changed, saying you that this is a specific day in history where a lot of the world changed into the world we know, like a specific moment in history. And this is what we, I think, wanted to make clear with that title, right, Tim?
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I agree.
That's good. Well, I want to get into the spoilers. So podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube watchers of the YouTube page, the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, where you could see all of these Zoomcasts. You could see us in these little boxes. If you have not yet seen September 5, go see it, press pause, come back, because we are going to get into the spoilers. You've been warned, and let's get right into it. You were saying earlier there was a piece of archival footage that you found very close to the shoot that you wanted to get in there. What was it? And tell us about that last minute rewrite.
We already read about that moment, but we never actually saw it. It's the moment where the one hostage who escaped, Tuvia Sokolsky, gets interviewed by Jim McKay, and they're losing the satellite while they're interviewing him. And we didn't know that they were, we knew that they were losing the satellite, and we knew that they were interviewing him, but we didn't know that this happened at the exact same time. So we saw that interview for the first time. We thought, okay, because we already had like this arc with losing the satellite, but we lost it again because we said, okay, maybe that's too much with the satellite. But that this happens in one of the most emotional scenes gave us the idea, okay, this is like in a nutshell our movie. So we have to get the real moment in and get this whole arc of losing the satellite and getting the satellite from CBS in the first place. We have to write that in again to build up that scene. So that was a pretty like major plot line we had to put back in again, right, Tim?
Yeah.
The concept of losing the satellite added to your ticking clock the whole time, and people forget that there was just one satellite feed that the American networks were sharing and had previously agreed to who was going to have access to it at what time of day. And one of my favorite things, because you were saying earlier in your research phase that you did so much research on the analog equipment in the broadcast studio. In America, we call them a bug. It's the little, logo in the bottom corner of the screen. And to see the solution that they came up with, which was to create the ABC bug and keep it on their screen in an analog way. They filmed it against a screen and then keyed it out and did it as an overlay and then kept it going during when CBS took over. It was a way to still have ABC represented. It was a genius move. And I loved all the stuff like that. From anything I've read, basically your usages of analog, you got it totally down to the wire, everything just pitch perfect. But then a lot of the equipment you couldn't have on while you were filming because it was actually too loud in real life. Is that right?
Some of it, yeah. Yes, there was one machine, one of these tape machines that also, they were slowing down for the slow motion,
yes.
Which I actually learned from somebody also when I did the research, and I was at the coverage of a Knicks game, and I was in the slow motion trailer. And I didn't know that there's a whole trailer for people just capturing slow motion. My respect, by the way, has grown so much for people who do these sports broadcasts or live television in general. If I see this now, it's like if I see a regular football game or so, like I know what's going on behind the scenes. Anyhow, and he told me he was like working quite a long time already. And he told me that back then they used to do it like this by really slowing it down manually.
Right. They were using their hands on the 1/4-inch tape to slow down the speed. I was dying at that moment. That was just great.
We didn't do that because we felt it was almost too much. It took you maybe too much out of the bigger subject in that moment.
But you did have that moment.
Yeah, but actually they used checkers from
plastic pieces, like from the game,
Yeah, and put it into the tape and then had it as a handle. That's how they did it. That's originally also how we wrote it, but then it just felt on set, it felt weird. It felt like, oh no, the audience is going to think too much about that. So let's keep it a little bit more. I want to add that for us, or that other thing that you just mentioned with the logo, for us also the technological apparatus, it was also so important to portray that accurately because it's more than just a gimmick, a visual gimmick in the movie. It's also about part of the bigger topic, right?
Yeah.
Because our movie is also about how the media changed and how technology has an influence on the media, and in that sense has an influence on how we perceive world events. And I would just want to add it in a sense to the story with the logo. In a way, of course, then suddenly that story belonged to somebody. That's also what the character then Tom McGarr says to Peter Sarsgaard's character: you own the story now. Of course, also something that can zombie actually own that story at all? So that's all these questions that we wanted to raise.
Everything that was going on, they were taking apart a radio and turning it into a police scanner, which was fascinating. They were taking walkie-talkies and holding them up to the phone and broadcasting that live on air, and having phone calls, the phone next to microphones being broadcast live. So I mean, all the ways that they were being inventive in the studio to accomplish their goal of continuing to tell the story, and everybody was unified in that goal, is again a driving force of the movie that I absolutely loved. Really, the only part of the process that you didn't show was you were reminding people that all the film in the field at the time was shot on film, which then had to be developed on site, which only took 20 minutes. But then there's the telecine process of going from film to video, and I'm guessing they were just playing some of it in there live. And by the way, we didn't need to see that, but like literally that was the only part of the process the movie didn't show, and that was just fine with me because you still have a bigger story to tell than how telecine machines work.
We had one on set.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, we had one on set, but it didn't work. And then as we couldn't show it working, we thought like maybe then it doesn't. And we didn't want to fake it. And so we thought, but your very precise observation that part is actually missing.
One of the strengths is showing this international team that was also working together in the studio. And the character of Marvin Bader from real life, he was talking at one point to the character of Marianne Gebhardt, who is a composite character from everything I've researched. And she's the local German woman who was helping them as a translator. And she became crucial to them being able to tell the story and have someone that understood the local scene, could understand what the police were saying, the other media were saying. And there's just this great line right at the beginning before the events unfold where Marvin, just kind of looks at her. And this is 27 years after the end of World War II. And he kind of says, like, oh, did your parents not know anything that was going on during the war? And it was just a great reminder of, the stakes that Germany had in this Olympics, because the previous Olympics were also a nightmare for Germany in a different way with the rise of fascism. And it was just once again showing this localized version of, the stakes, which I thought was great. Tell us about creating the character of Marianne, because she becomes an important character. And I'm just curious what went into that.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's more or less like two sources in a way. And the first source is like, as you mentioned, a composite character of there were translators like her, like provided from the Olympic Games to the broadcast centers. And that specific day, ABC was grabbing almost every German they could grab. They like somebody who can translate something for them or getting an info. I mean, at some point there was even like Rune Arlich's driver getting drawn into the process, translating some things. On one side, she's representing all the Germans that helped that day to translate and getting info. Like you said, on the other side, I kind of channeled my parents and their generation in her, because I was born in Munich and raised in Munich. My parents too. They were like at Marianne's age when the Olympics took place. And I actually talked to my parents today, and they told me, yeah, we really tried. There was like, you could apply to a game and winning tickets for the Olympics, and they won like 2 tickets for 2 events. So this was a really big deal. And not only because of the event, it was because they and their generation could show their Germany to the world, like the new democratic Germany, like the liberal open Germany. And it was so important to them that this works. And that day they were devastated. They were devastated that not only like this image got like destroyed in a way, but also like trying to communicate that image was opening a door with that missing protection systems, like that there were no like armed police, because it didn't look good to have like armed Germans patrolling fences. So they didn't have like armed police in the village. So it was quite open to everybody to enter the village. Creating that image was kind of a door opener for that event. So I think that was heartbreaking for our whole generation. In a way, try to give Marianne this mindset.
She was a great character and very effective. I mean, I want to talk about the journalism of it for a moment. There's just a purity to it that, unfortunately, standards do still exist, but we live in a world now that's so mired in disinformation and misinformation. And here, they're having prolonged debates about whether or not to use the word terrorism for, one of the first major broadcasts, which ended up being the correct word to use because this was a pre-planned attack against, non-combatant civilians. So it makes sense. But, up until that point, they were using the word militant or guerrilla fighters. So terrorist was, in this scope, a much bigger word. And also the concept of verifying your sources and having at least 3 sources is something that, you showed very effectively as, the want to publish immediately. And that's how misinformation and disinformation spreads. So tell us about keeping that journalistic integrity at the core for September 5th.
The special thing is that these were sports broadcasters. So this opened for us an opportunity for them to have these discussions without it feeling ridiculous to the audience. Because if they would have been trained and experienced, why would they discuss amongst them? These questions, that's often what you have that problem when you talk about the very specific world, that these people wouldn't talk about information that the audience actually needs. But since they, a few hours before, were reporting on Mark Spitz winning his 7th gold medal, they had to discuss all of these questions. I want to add, maybe, obviously, while technology has changed, a lot of people that work in today's newsrooms have seen the film by now. We had a screening in Washington where a lot of people working in that area saw it. And they came up to me afterwards and said, for them, it was striking to see that even though technology, of course, is different, the bigger questions that they discuss in these rooms are still exactly the same. Yeah. So the wording question, of course, is today, again, very, very much happening. The discussion on censorship, what do we show is even becoming more relevant. And also how fast do we go out with the news is something that they discuss basically with every outlet.
They at one point say, like, what happens if someone's shot? Are we going to show that on live TV?
Yeah.
And generally at this point, people had seen the footage, ranging from the Kennedy assassination to Lee Harvey Oswald being killed on
Yeah.
live TV to,
Yeah.
the after effects of Martin Luther King and Vietnam being played out each night. So they were still finding their footing of what they could show. And,
Yeah.
saying that there was always going to be something to cut away to made a lot of sense as well. One of the interesting things that I also found was there's a concept of having a false victory in a screenplay. And here it's just the worst, in which, already they're in the control room. They can't tell what's going on at the airport. And, your wildest cutaway outside of the control room was showing the footage of just how close the crowds got to the terrorists as they were loading the buses. And obviously that was coming from archival footage as well. But basically, there was this false sense of victory in which they had the wrong information coming from the airport that everybody was safe. Everybody was fine. And it was all on Jeff whether or not they were going to run that, because him and Marvin were arguing about, is it verified enough? And, they knew the minute the ABC News said it, it was going to be the word, but they weren't sure about their previous sources. That became a really fascinating thing, especially for people, that don't know the story. And the 2 times I've seen it, I was with people that don't know the story, don't know the ending. And it was a very fascinating way to, just like in real life, pull the carpet out from under the audience. What could you tell us about constructing that moment and leading up to it?
They were truly experts in creating live TV or live broadcasts. They were like cutting edge pioneers in developing and coming up with the elements that we still know in live broadcasting, but they didn't know live broadcasting means in that context. So that was kind of the back and forth. They could do it, they knew how to do it, but they didn't know what the effect will be. I think in that particular scene, it's very important to say that it was the German TV who broke the news. Like it was the ZDF, the German state TV, who broke the news, and they kind of tried to figure out what was happening. And when we speak like in the structure of a screenplay, the biggest like setback for them was losing the story, leaving the village, and they didn't have like a grip on it again. And now suddenly they becoming like depend on the material that was brought into. There was not a direct line anymore. So it was really getting complicated. And I think everybody that day was hoping for that big happy end. Going back to the real events, I think there were even like newspapers printed, because I think everybody's ready to tell that happy end, because it was like the best end for that story to tell. But it just wasn't a happy end that day.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. We're in our 13th year now, and we couldn't have done it without you. If you're enjoying today's episode and you want to read the screenplay for September 5, you could read it on the Backstory Magazine blog over at backstory.net. And also, what's really cool is the filmmakers gave us 2 very brief deleted scenes that we talk about a little later that you could also read on the Backstory Magazine blog. And there's a lot going on in the magazine. Our awards season issue, our Gladiator 2 issue is out, and we are continuing to update it with new articles because we're a digital magazine. We could do that. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading the free issue over at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, I'm offering you discount coupon code SAVE5 that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. All you got to do is enter it into your subscription cart at backstory.net. And while you're there, you could even give Backstory as a gift subscription. And one word of advice, the person you're giving the gift to will be notified immediately when you conclude your transaction. So you might want to write on their card the gift of Backstory for a 1-year subscription. And then once they get the card and open it, then you go and you do the thing and they get the email notification. There's plenty of options, but I just wanted you to know once you check out, they're notified immediately. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts. That's right, you could see us talking on Zoom. It would really mean a lot to me to see you show your support for independent entertainment journalism. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now let's jump right back into our conversation with co-writer Moritz Binder and co-writer-director Time Fehlbaum about their latest film, September 5, which is in theaters right now. I want to go back for a second, just some of the earlier moments. You had this character, Gary Slaughter, an African American, who they made fake credentials for and dressed him up like one of the athletes so that he could retrieve the cans of film and bring them back out for processing multiple times. When did you learn about that element? Because it's all those little touches that just give a great realism to the film.
We were so lucky to get in contact with there were like many runners that day, or at least two runners we know. We got into contact with Jimmy Scheffler, who was one of the runners, who told us his story and his day. And because it was such a life-changing day for anybody involved, so there were obviously like a lot of books written after that. There were like 2 books about Roone Arledge, one Jim McKay book. There was even like a book from the head engineer who wrote everything about that studio lot. So in Roone Arledge's book, there is Gary Slaughter mentioned, that he was like this Afro-American who was getting the material in and out that day. And so it's really based on true events. And even this little interview, like this little comic relief where he gets interviewed, that really actually happened to Jimmy Scheffler. And it was just a radio interview, not a TV interview, but he was interviewed by a journalist who thought he was an athlete. And he asked him, so what's your discipline? He said, I think weightlifting, because he had to come up with something. Right. So like I said in the beginning of this conversation, reality is always so much richer than anything I think it can come up with. And I don't know who said it, maybe it was Oscar Wilde, but the only difference between reality and fiction is that fiction has to be believable. So sometimes we had to tune it a little bit down, because there were like a lot of things happening that day you wouldn't believe.
What were some of those things? What were things that came in research that you didn't put in the movie, but that maybe for a while you thought about having a scene?
We talked to Sean McMahon, who as a teenager was there, and we thought maybe we make him as a character, the teenager, his father is next door, but it just didn't feel appropriate to the bigger subject in a way. It was almost that coming of age story sideline, and it didn't feel right regarding what actually is going on. That's something quite early on we decided that we don't want to have any private storylines. So we had these little arcs, as I would say. So that's, for example, something that we took artistic license to tell, that this would be Jeffrey's first day on a coverage like this. This is something that was not the case, but it, of course, heightens the stakes at the beginning. So in their professional environment, we wanted to have these little arcs, or for Marianne, that she has this dream of the new Germany and then it gets shattered, but only to a certain degree. Another thing that I maybe want to say is that Howard Cosell, who is of course a big character in the very well known in the States, at the end supposedly came into the studio and wanted to be part of the final announcement, wanted to get on stage with Jim McKay and also talk about it. And he was did drink quite a lot before, as I'm turning everything that is said in the biography by Knowledge. And we decided also, we were thinking about including that, but then we thought, like, if we now at the end suddenly Howard Cosell enters the studio and is drunk, and then once again it's a complete different film.
So tell us what happened, because I mean, Howard Cosell, he was a Jewish sportscaster. He had a wild attitude. He was a celebrity when he was around in the 70s. And did he get on TV? Because I mean, you do have him on the phone at one point being interviewed, which totally made sense. And I easily could have seen you hiring an actor to play him. But so what did happen? Was he almost going to be on the air, or because he was drunk, did they stop him from being on the air?
I mean, he was on the air. He did actually say those things when the helicopters arrived. So this was based on true events. And later, Roone, I think he wrote that he was really getting emotionally. I mean, obviously he was emotionally involved and he was frustrated. Yeah. And I think he was under the influence. I think Roone says that too. And he just tried to calm him down. He wanted to be part of it because he was so emotionally involved. And this is why we wanted to have the original Jim McKay, because the way he tells it to the world is in such a almost poetic, calming, comforting way that I think Roone Arledge was right to give it to Jim in that moment.
One of the things that I thought was great was also showing the ineptitude of the German police force. And, they commented on the fact that, there were post-war rules that didn't have them have an active army sniper that was easily able to come down. And it was a really meta fascinating moment when basically you're showing the control room looking at the rooms of the terrorists where they had, kidnapped people, and you're seeing the glow of the TVs behind the drapes. And there was such a great sense of geography, but even my high school daughter who I watched it with, she's like, wait a minute, aren't the terrorists just watching what these snipers are setting up and doing? And she's like, that seems like a mistake. And it's like, yes, that's exactly the point. And about 30 seconds after she said that, kind of under her breath, the people in the control room realized the same thing because they didn't have the experience of a live broadcast like this. Talk about constructing that moment, because it was really effective. The footage that was either archival or recreated was great, showing these snipers trying to set up, but then the realization that you were just broadcasting literally what they were going to do for the terrorist was a huge mistake.
Yeah, so it's based on, I think, two facts, like the fact that that they were asking themselves that question, and there's still like the theory that this police attack was caught off because of that, but it's still not known. I mean, right now, the Interior Minister of Germany built like a task force to investigate everything that happened that day, because they really want to get it right this time. What did happen, and what were all the mistakes Germany made? So there's still a theory that is the reason why they called it off. And Jeffrey told us, and it's even written in Rune Arlich's biography, that the police force was storming into the control room and were themselves terribly afraid that the terrorists actually can see it. So they wanted to shut off all the live cams. And we thought, this is, again, in a nutshell, what this movie is about, is like, when is reporting on something becoming part of it? And the way they approached it that day makes clear. And like you said, our generation, even like younger generations, they immediately think of that. But back then, it was a thought that has to be like come up and be processed slowly. Like, wait a second, and where can they receive it? And it's still not clear if they could receive ABC or just the tower cam of ABC. It's still unknown, but at least there was the possibility of the fact that they watched it. So the police shut it off. And even Jeff said, we didn't think of that until the police came in. So that was kind of a moment where they lost their naivety in that moment, say, oh, yeah, we are alive. So this is something everybody thinks of now, but wasn't like as obvious back then.
The fact that we know, and again, there's this where it comes so good that Moritz did all this research before, that we know from the police files, it's probably not the reason why that action was called off. It's much more likely that it was just because the police was overwhelmed and they didn't know on how to, actually they were completely not trained for doing this. But of course, for our story, that the fact that Jeffrey told us that they did come into the studio, we embraced that. And as I said before, we told everything from their perspective. So they were asking themselves that question for sure. And actually just going to add that this is real footage. Like, we did recreate some of the scenes in the Olympic Village. We also didn't want to show anyone's face who really lost their life out of respect. But the footage of these policemen in the tracksuits on the roofs preparing to storm in, that is real footage.
One of the things that's really fascinating is that this has been nominated for a bunch of editing awards, and it definitely deserves it. But I just want to remind people that it's also the pacing of your script that is leading to that editing. And I'm curious, what could you tell us about tricks that you learned for your writing that helped with the pacing? Because a lot of your scenes are very short, but they're also very focused. They're not trying to get us somewhere too fast. They're giving us just the amount of information that we need to keep moving forward while having an emotional investment in seeing these characters get through the day. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, both on the page and of course, Tim, as a director, your handle on pacing.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for recognizing this. We appreciate that, because we wanted to have that pace already in the script, that you feel that already when you read the script. We decided that we wanted to have that pace once Jeffrey Mason told us how it felt for them, that they didn't have any time to reflect on everything. They just reacted on the spot. Also, I wanted to have as few words as possible on a page. That starts with very practical things that usually you have in every headline. You have interior, ABC Sports Studio, control room, night or day. Since everything, basically every scene was interior ABC studio, we could skip that part. And I wanted a very few descriptions always, and short and fast dialogues, and make it for the reader also an experience of, like, you get also in that rush of adrenaline of live broadcasting on the situation. And it's only after you read the script, you're like, what was actually going on? As the same as it felt for Jeffrey Mason, as he told us.
You had said that your script was at one point 160, 170 170 pages. What was your shooting draft for something that had this pacing that was this quick?
I think it was around 100 or like a little bit under that, because what Tim always said, and that made total sense, is that we need a page turner just to get everybody in the mood of the pace of the movie. On the other hand, we wanted to be as precise as possible because Tim wanted to move inside the studio like a documentary team. So what we did actually was to write like the shooting draft and the script that they gave like the pacing and the feeling of the movie. And then we wrote a script that was just for the background. So every actor without lines in that scene or every extra in the control room knew what they had to do.
You wrote a secondary script that was just for the extras, for the background talent?
Yes, this was Tim's idea, to give them something that because they clearly have to be like professionals in that scene. You know,
so what are their actions in the background? Who's relaying tape? What buttons are they pushing?
So we gave them like their profession, that we gave them like names. In every scene they know, okay, I am the guy who has always New York on the line, and now New York is asking, or I have to ask New York for when the next break will be. Or the other guy is like the one who writes down the notes, okay, which scene is going on the highlight reel. And so everybody knew what their profession is and what they have to do in that scene, so that it feels like a clockwork. But this was just for them. It was not in the shooting draft. The shooting draft had to be like really slim, high pace, get the right feeling. And the other script was just to create the clockwork to move around like a documentary team.
How many pages is that secondary script?
Long.
It was always like the control room scene, and under that scene written, okay, and now every extra. It was like the shooting draft, but with extensions in every scene for the extras, which was almost like one page per scene.
It's also something that I observed in these control rooms, that everybody like really precisely has a function for that whole machinery to work. So even if that's in the background and out of focus, you feel it again. It's like not something that you, as the audience, would point out, oh, that person doesn't know what to do, but you feel it. And so that's why we want, on the other hand, as Moritz said, we didn't want to have it in the main script because it would just like interfere too much with the reading experience. I want to use the opportunity to add that we also had a third writer working on the script, Alex David, and that he also, because we are, as you can obviously hear, English isn't our mother language, so we had to have someone also who helped us with the dialogues especially and the descriptions. But he then, as we moved on, the process became even more than just helping us with the translation. He also helped us fine-tuning the characters and everything, and is also largely responsible in making the script so tight and very focused.
How do you know Alex? What made you decide to bring him on, aside from just punching up the English and then doing more, as you just said?
The producer Thomas Wöbke worked with him before and was recommending him to us.
You know, the ending is still a nail biter, but there's no footage because they couldn't get cameras really over to the airport. It's an interesting moment in which you're trapped in the control room. They've had such a good grip on the story. As you said earlier, this is when the story gets away from them, and they are like the millions of people around the world waiting to see what happened. Were there ever any iterations where you did any staged recreations or used footage from other agencies, possibly German television, stuff like that, to show more of what was happening at the airport? I really love the way it worked out, but I could have seen in earlier drafts you having a different approach to that scene.
We had different approaches, you're totally right, but you have to know that there isn't really footage. I think there is one real black and white 60 millimeters that day with like 2 shots in it. Nobody knows whose material it is. Some say it's the police material, so there isn't really material. But what we had were like the original footage ABC broadcasted, and we really could tell that with the moment the story left the village, they had to make a decision, and suddenly they started reporting on sports again, and they even like were airing some pre-tape and like about the history of the Olympic Games footage, because they had to stretch the broadcast until they get the news. And this is, at first when we saw it, we were kind of disappointed, but then we thought, no, this is interesting, because they had to make a decision back then, and their decision was stretch the show with anything we can have until we get news. So this was like the process we wanted to show them.
Funny that you mention it, because for a long, and I'm really talking insights here now, for a long time, Moritz, as you certainly remember, we had that moment, like once they left to the airport, suddenly the whole script was like, what was it, 20 pages? it opened up and you are in one of these choppers with they land and you are on that airport and you were witnessing an action scene live, because we were also like afraid, like maybe it's not enough always in that control room. We need something like this. But then it didn't feel right. First of all, again, it costs a lot of money, but it also didn't feel right. And I'm so glad that we made that decision then at the end not to show it, because it's so much more interesting. And it would have left, it would just, I'm a strong believer, if you have a cinematic concept that is actually, you have to go really strict through with it, right? You have to. And we would have left the control room. It wouldn't have made sense. It wouldn't have added anything. And it just also made us realize again that this movie is also a lot about what you don't see more than about what you see. Absolutely. And it might be scarier because you don't see it. The best example still is, I don't have to tell you, is Jaws.
Yeah.
That the shark didn't work. What they did they decide we don't show it. And we just have the music, and the movie is it's the best movie, one of the best movies ever. But it's weak then when you see the shark, actually, because you see that it's that robot. It's just like for us, it was the same. It made it more scary also in a way to just have that dark image of the airport and just the muscle flashes that you see. By the way, just as a side note, we did shoot as a model shoot. We are all, including the cinematographer, we all believe strongly in the analog world of filmmaking, and we had a little model on of that airport with smoke and just filmed that within a scale so that it fitted. It looked like a big one, and added digitally the muscle flashes.
So wait, you did film that and then you cut it out? Is that what you're saying?
No. It's in the film briefly, where you just see Marianne Gebhardt, Leonie Benner's character, standing at that fence. And then you hear it, and they pan to the airport, and you see these little muscle flashes.
Sticking to your concept and continuing to reinforce it rather than trying to be an action film or something else is truly one of the strengths here. I'm curious, what lessons did you learn while editing? Because it is a great tight edit, and obviously your script has transitions that I could see were built in. But what were some surprises that you learned during editing, and or deleted scenes, if there was anything that you cut out that you want to tell us about?
We didn't cut out so much. I mean, in sense of whole scenes. Why editing was important is the way I was telling you before, how we shot it in that documentary style, just long takes. That's nice because it gives you this authentic material that you would never get if you would plan everything. But the flip side is like it generates a lot of material. So shaping that is where the editing has become essential. It was rather about finding quiet moments in the editing than about keeping the tensions. And in the editing, I think it was Stanley Kubrick who once said, like, you write the film 3 times. Once when you write it, once, of course, when you shoot it, and once then in the editing, a film is recreated in a way. And it was everything in the script, but of course, we always had to make that act of balance that we don't exploit the subject ourselves in a way. So, and this is also where Hans-Jörg, the editor, has had a very good feeling on getting the right tonality, and where I owe him a lot on how the film finally feels.
How many cameras were you running?
Always 2.
Okay, so you did, even when you did those long takes, you still did have a way to cut away, so that's good.
Yeah, and you would take in account that you shoot each other. That's part of the game. And as it's taking place in the studio anyway, you don't see the equipment so much.
Moritz, is there anything that you learned during editing that stuck out?
I have to circle back maybe to the beginning of the conversation, because what I have to say is that when I attended film university and when I was starting, Tim already did Hell. And I saw it like when I was beginning at the university. And what really got to me was like how physical this movie was, how much you could feel the heat, how much you could smell the sweat. And I had this in mind with the second movie, The Colony. I had that in mind when I wrote the script with you, because this script, and obviously I love the script, I'm proud of that, but it could be kind of boring. Just those people in one room, as high stakes as this whole event is, but it's just a bunch of people in a room. So I was always like sure and convinced that Tim is the right director for that, because he will make it so physical. You will smell the coffee, you will like feel the heat, you will like feel that there is no more oxygen in the room. So with that in my mind, when I saw the first editing, it was even more clear to me that this is working, because it feels like being in that room. we tried it to make this happening on the page, but it's a very different thing to make it happen when you shoot it and when you edit it. And this is what they Tim and Hansjörg achieved with Marcus, the DP, is that you actually are in that room. I have to say, I'm so thankful for this collaboration because I think this is like the perfect match for that.
Tim's direction was great, and the actors really rose to the challenge as well under Tim's direction and based on their own talents. You were talking about circling back to university. I forgot to ask you guys this. At your school, isn't Olympic Village like dorms or classrooms or something, like the actual location that this was taking place in? Isn't that part of your university?
Every student can apply for a dorm there, not our university, but every university in Munich. So that because it's like the small housing where the athletes lived, it's now like housing for students.
Does that mean that there are students right now in the room where the kidnappings took place? Oh, wow.
Yes.
That's crazy.
The apartment where it took place, that's not rooms where people sleep. These are labs, I think.
Finding that ending moment where Jeffrey's called into Aldrich's office and he thinks maybe he's going to be fired for, having that moment where they went live and said that everybody was fine, everybody was alive, and really he's congratulated. It's a fascinating way to end, and there's so many different ways to end this movie. Like even when he turns off all the equipment in the broadcast room, I could have seen it cutting to black, but no, he goes out to his car. Talk about finding that ending, because, this decompression of going and meeting and learning that the day's disaster was a disaster, but Jeffrey actually rose to the challenge and is appreciated. And there were a lot of merits, even with their mistakes. Tell us about other endings you conceived and how you arrived at these actual moments.
After that day, there were like different paths for the different characters in real life, because Rune Arlich later became not only heads of ABC Sports, but also head of ABC News. And I think he was the first person who had like both at the same time, because he kind of reinvented how news are told on television that day. So he was like thinking about, okay, this can be a new like territory for live broadcasting, like how he told news that day. Jeffrey, on the other hand, he never chose to leave sports, because after that day, he was even more convinced that he's not a news person, he is a sports person. And he told us that very deeply from his heart, that it wasn't until after that last like moment in the studio when he went home, like to the hotel room, sat down on the bed, then suddenly all the feelings came over him and he started to cry. So we thought maybe we have to follow him there, but then we thought, no, maybe it's enough when he leaves, like at first, like the studio breathes out by switching all of the equipment, and you have like this feeling of the studio breathes out and it's over. And then he as a person sits down into the car and takes this deep breath where he like suddenly realizes, this really happened. And then this adds up on what Tim said, that we didn't want to make it too much about the persons involved. We really wanted to make it about the event that took place. So we thought the parking lot is where we should end it.
Yeah, also this is the only time we leave the studio, and it would in a way mirror that beginning when he's there. But getting back to the question, I also want to say that, yeah, we've shot it in many ways. We also shot a version of where at the end it ends with a pan up to the Olympic Tower standing there, and you see that. I'm actually generally a believer that if it makes sense to write alternate scenes at some point, it makes sense at the ending. So if you have an alternate idea as a scriptwriter, so I think it's always, especially for the shooting draft, it's good to know what you want, but maybe for the shooting draft too, if there's something that can easily be shot, I think it can always help. Because then in the editing, actually, we found out that we should just be intimate with him in that very moment. Yeah. That we don't need that pan with the Olympic Tower. It's such an intimate film, and we just wanted to be with him, and John Magaro, so nicely reflected everything in his acting of what they went through, and that was it. It's also a small film in a way, so it should end small.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great ending. It was really a fascinating emotional journey to see the decompression, to see that he's not going to lose his job, and to just see him shut it down and go into his car for a first moment alone. That was great. What was your toughest scene? That's something that I think would be great to end on. So starting with you, Moritz, your toughest scene on the page, the one that you remember really, struggling with and coming back to, and how did you creatively rise to the challenge?
Well, the toughest scene, and I really owe the outcome to Leonie and to John and to Tim was a last scene between Jeffrey Mason and Marianne, where Marianne is coming back from the airport. She's devastated, she's frustrated, and John addresses her and says, I'm sorry that you went through so much. And it was such a tricky scene on the page because Marianne, I mean, she's a person, and then she also stands for that generation. And it was really hard to get it on the page that the frustration and the way she deals with that is a way a person would deal with it and not a generation. So it was maybe overwritten in a way. The dialogue was too explicit. And I remember, and Tim can say something about that John and Leonie on the set, that was great that I could be every day on the set, which was great for me as a writer to get into all the rehearsals. But seeing them trying to get the dialogue to life made me clear that this is not something a person would say. It's what a generation would say, or maybe a scientific paper would say. And then you can see how great those actors are because they are all saying it without saying it. It's just in their look. Yeah. And it took some tries, it took some time to get it. But then I was so relieved that they didn't use those lines, right, Tim? I think that was the trickiest scene we had.
Absolutely. It's a good example of you didn't really realize that when reading and writing the script because it just felt right to say that at the end. But then you realize on set and with everything that you've shot so far, and with what they say with their eyes. And so it's all there. It's not needed anymore. And it's again, and maybe that's also for me, something I generally learned from that project. But the biggest lesson is it's again a lesson in how sometimes leaving things out or limit yourself is more interesting than trying to explain too much or showing too much. Because also getting back to the film school times, I had with my very first movie, when it was a small movie, everything was told from that perspective, even though it takes place in that post-apocalyptic world. It's very subjective. It was shot for not much money. And then with my second movie, I tried to redo that, but with a bigger budget, with more scope, so to say, and something that maybe was not so much coming from the heart as this one did. And for me, the biggest lesson is how a limitation sometimes is just it can be more interesting as long as what you're doing is coming from the heart and is something that surprises people also. I think with my previous movie, I could tell you 10 or 20 other movies that you could compare it to. And it has also been compared to that. But this one, I'm proud that we can say that I don't know a movie that I can immediately compare it to. It's very unique. And I think that's to a large part because we had found that perspective. And also as a writer and director, if you then have a specific perspective, you can go really into deep in that field. That's why we really could portray that world, hopefully in a way where the audience even says, oh, wow, I didn't know that. I even learned something today.
Was there a scene that was difficult for you to direct? Do you remember a tough scene as a director?
Yeah, the one that Moritz already brought up would also be the one because we shot it 3 times on different locations.
Which locations?
We then also thought maybe it has to take place at another part of the studio. Because we had it first at the exit, and it felt of course, the last scene is at the exit. That doesn't feel right. And then, of course, we didn't have all the extras anymore because we had to shoot it on a day where they weren't be there, and we didn't have the budget or much time to shoot it. So again, it was okay, then let's keep it really intimate in the editing room. And I want to say, maybe from a practical point of view, everything with that monitor wall was really tough to shoot. It looks so easy. You would never guess how complicated it was to get these images on these monitors because we wanted them to look at real images and that we could shoot it with the monitors and not have exchange anything in post-production. And that was super, super complicated because it was every scene 18 monitors that had to switch and stuff.
Right. And it had to be playback at the right speed, which you had to convert. So that's a pain because, other movies would probably just green screen it and drop the stuff later. Yeah. But you being able to do it live in itself, that is a pain.
Yeah. And also the archival footage mixed with our footage, and that was all quite complicated.
Well, if you want to send us any of the deleted script scenes that you were talking about, we're happy to put it on the Backstory Magazine blog. But look, Tim, you guys have been very generous with your time. I absolutely
we enjoyed this.
It was a great conversation, Jeff.
Well, congrats on a great film, and I look forward to having you back again. And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to co-writer Moritz Binder and co-writer director Tim Fehlbaum for being so generous with their time and coming down today to chat about their latest film, September 5, which is in theaters right now. And of course, if you want to read the screenplay for September 5, you could do so over at the Backstory Magazine blog. You could also read the 2 deleted scenes that we were talking about. They're very short, but interesting to see. We were able to put those on the blog as well. As I'm sure everyone knows, Los Angeles has been affected by these devastating forest fires. And as our recovery from the wildfires continues, remember you could donate anytime to a bunch of great organizations, including the LAFD Foundation Wildfire Emergency Fund, which helps out our firefighters, and also the California Fire Foundation, which helps out victims of fires throughout the state. Thanks for considering throwing a little something their way. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. We're going to turn 13 later this year, and we couldn't have done it without you. And you know, our Gladiator 2 issue is live. It's our award season issue, and we are updating it with new articles because we're a digital magazine, and we could do that. If you've never test drove us before, you could read the free issue at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app Backstory. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. Remember, you could also give Backstory as a gift subscription. All you got to do is tick the little gift subscription box in your checkout card at backstory.net. But one word of advice, once your transaction is complete, the recipient is notified immediately. So you might want to write it on a card and say, you've got a 1-year subscription to Backstory. And then once you give the card and they open it, then you go and you complete the transaction. Or you could send it to yourself, and then once you give it to them, you could write us, and then we'll change their name to the recipient rather than your name, so that could work. There's plenty of options to give the gift of Backstory to the storyteller in your life. That's all I'm saying. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts. That's right, you could see us talking on Zoom. It would really mean a lot to me to see you show your support for independent entertainment journalism. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2025. All rights reserved. If you want to drop me a line, you could always find me on Twitter as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. Those same handles work on Instagram, Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. Those same handles work on Blue Sky, Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. I also have a Facebook fan page, so you can find me there. Or you could go old school. You could write me an email at backstoryletters@gmail.com. That works too. And no matter where you find me, I'll do my darndest to respond as soon as I can. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.